way too many needles and spending too much money. Moving on. Hi everyone, it's Carol. Welcome back to Pattern Encyclopedia, where we talk about all things knitting and sometimes crochet. So when you first start knitting, there is so much going on that it can be very overwhelming for a lot of people. And it was very overwhelming for me as well when I first began. And so that's why I wanted to sit down and film a video today about the top 5 things I wish I knew when I first started knitting. Now, even though this video is directed towards more beginner knitters, hopefully there is at least one takeaway for an intermediate or expert knitter out there. So if that's you, definitely still stick around, and if I miss anything that you think is really important to know as a beginner knitter, be sure to leave it down in the comments so that we can all share from each other's wisdom. And without further ado, let's get into the video. So the number one thing I wish I knew when I first started knitting was to invest in a pair of interchangeable knitting needles. Now, I would probably wait to do this until you're certain that knitting is something that you're going to do for a long time and that you're really into, because they can be a little bit pricey. However, there are some ways to get around the price, and I'll explain that in a few minutes. But if you don't know what interchangeable needles are, they look like this, and you can actually take the needle off of the cord and put a different needle size on. And so that allows you to adjust both the cord length and the needle size for any project that you would need. Now, the reason that I suggest to invest in this is because if you have interchangeable needles, you will probably not need to purchase anything else. Different patterns call for both different cord lengths and different size needles, and so if you went to the store and just bought the regular kind where you can't take the needle off, for every single project you did, you would end up with a ton more needles than you will ever need, and spending probably a lot more money than you would ever need as well. Now, this is kind of a tip within a tip, but one thing I wish I knew about these like circular knitting needles is that you can actually knit flat on them as well as in the round. So if you have a pair of interchangeable needles, you have needles for knitting flat and in the round both. So that is a tip within a tip for you. But because these can be a little bit pricey, specifically at craft stores, I would first recommend, if you are going to purchase from a craft store like I did, to wait until you have a really nice coupon for a regularly priced item. So for me, I bought mine from Michaels, and Michaels always has a coupon, it seems like. But I waited until I got a 40% off one regular priced item, and it brought the total cost down a very significant amount and made the purchase a lot more manageable for me. Now, there's also another option, and that is to purchase a pair from Amazon. I think that this is a really good option as well if you are looking for something that's more affordable. And I'm going to leave a link for the type of interchangeable needles that I use, as well as a Amazon brand down below in the description box if you are interested in checking either of those out. But I wish I had known about interchangeable needles sooner, and so that is why I'm here, is to tell you so that you don't have to go through the same struggles as me in buying way too many needles and spending too much money. Moving on. The second thing I wish I knew when I first started knitting is actually to keep a crochet hook on hand. Now, you can find these in the same aisle as knitting needles at the craft store. And the reason you're gonna want one of these bad boys is in case you drop any stitches, which as a beginner knitter and expert, if that's you, there is gonna come a time when you drop a stitch, or 2 or 3. And with a crochet hook, it makes it really easy to go through and scoop that stitch up, take it back to where it belongs, and it's like it never even happened. Back when I first started knitting, I remember dropping my first stitch and I had no idea what to do. I thought my entire project was ruined. I was in a bit of a panic, and I ran to my friend who taught me to knit, and I was like, what do I do? She's like, have no fear. And she showed me how to pick up that stitch with the crochet hook, and my life has not been the same since. So I thought it'd be great to spread that wisdom to you guys as well. Now, the next thing I wish I had known when I first started knitting may seem pretty obvious to some people, but to me, it wasn't. And that is to get your knitting books from the library as opposed to purchasing them from the store. When you're browsing the aisles for yarn, there's all these really cute books about knitting different things, you know, knitting animals and sweaters and socks and all these different things that it's like you want to buy all the books, but they are so expensive. And the great thing about getting your knitting books from the library is that if there does happen to be a book that you want to purchase, you can check it out from the library first and see if it's something that you really would use long term and that you would want to invest in. I don't know why this was such a groundbreaking concept to me when my friend started going to the library for her knitting books, but I don't know, whenever I think of libraries, I just think of like novels and things like that, not craft books. But I can spend hours just looking through the knitting books at my local library because they have so many, and a lot of the titles you'll recognize from the craft store. But instead of spending $40 on it, you are getting it for free, which is really great. And again, if you end up liking a book enough that you think you would want to purchase it, then great. But at least this way you'll know for sure before spending a ton of money on a book that you never read. The next thing I wish I had known when I first started knitting is that working in the round and working cable stitches is not as hard as it looks. When I first started knitting, I thought it would be ages until I learned how to knit in the round, knit cables, or even with double pointed needles. Like, I was so scared of all of that. But it wasn't until I saw a couple of YouTube videos that I was like, wait a minute, this actually looks very doable. And it is, it's very doable. Now, obviously for your first project, like, you don't have to push yourself into making like a cable knit thing or working in the round. But if you really are going to be a long-term knitter, don't let these things scare you off. I just remember seeing all of these complicated cable sweaters and people working with circular needles in the round, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, they must be really good. But again, it's not that hard. Obviously you want to learn one thing at a time, but there's so many great YouTube videos and tutorials out there that learning is easier now than it ever has been before. Obviously some circular knits and cable stitches are harder than others, but just start with the easier ones. Maybe go and look up, you know, a beginner cable stitch pattern and watch a video on it, or look up a beginner circular needle tutorial. I promise it's very doable and you will be making things that you never imagined you would in no time. So if you have been avoiding any of these things, this is your sign to go and try them out. I promise you can do it. This brings us to the very last thing I wish I had known when I first started knitting, and that is that the type of yarn you use matters. Now again, this is another thing that looking back I'm like, duh, but when you first start, you don't know these things. Like, you're just going to the craft store and picking up the cheapest yarn you can find because you just started. First of all, I want to make sure that it's clear that it is perfectly an acceptable thing to go to your craft store and buy a cheap yarn, whether or not you're just starting. But especially when you're just starting, like, you don't want to spend a ton of money on yarn when you don't even know if this is a hobby you're going to continue, or maybe the things you're making aren't that cute yet, whatever it is. However, once you start dabbling in things like summer knits, like you want to make a t-shirt, for example, that you can wear when it's, you know, 70, 80 degrees outside, acrylic yarn is not going to be your friend. I would just recommend always going and Googling the best types of fibers for knitting whatever it is that you're trying to make. Acrylic yarn is a really great option for a cheaper version of a sweater or cardigan or even a blanket, but it is definitely not the one for a summer t-shirt. Let me show you something. So this shirt that I'm wearing right now, I initially started making in acrylic yarn, and this was kind of my rude awakening, if you will, is that I got this far tried it on and realized, oh my gosh, I'm never gonna be able to wear this when it is more than 60 degrees outside because it was so heavy and warm. Like, this would be great for a cardigan, and I'm thinking of adding sleeves and making it a cardigan, but not for a t-shirt. So, to reiterate, always make sure that the type of yarn you're using matches with the finished product that you're hoping to make. So those are all of the things I wish I had known when I first started knitting. Again, if you have any other tips that you think beginner knitters could benefit from, please leave those in the comments. I'm sure we all have a lot to share and a lot of wisdom when it comes to knitting, and so I'm really excited to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this in the future. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!